We'll follow the old man wherever he wants to go, whoever may be the foe, how little of them we know.
The Labour Party leader, a decade before Tony Blair, was Michael Foot, a lifelong left-wing socialist.
Because we love him and support him, he was with us in the 50s after all.
But Foot came under attack for not acting like a party leader.
He's the greatest party leader of them all.
Friends, I'm coming along here to impersonate the leader of the Labour Party. Some of you may say, well, what have you been up to all the rest of the week?
Follow the old man wherever he wants to go, whoever may be the foe, how little of them we know. We'll follow the old man, whatever he talks about, whoever he wants left in and he wants thrown out.
The Cenotaph in Whitehall, November 1981. Michael Foot, then aged 68, attends his first Remembrance Day ceremony as Labour leader. The way he looked at the Cenotaph was to cause one of the biggest political rows of his life. He was never to receive a larger postbag of protest. Foot was accused of showing disrespect by turning up in a donkey jacket. The incident was to dog his time as leader. The impression he gave was not that of an alternative Prime Minister to Margaret Thatcher, claimed his critics.
Well, just have a look. I don't think there's anything wrong with the impression now. Even now, you know, after all the talk. What's wrong with the coat? Many absurd things have happened to me in my life, but nothing more absurd than to be accused of some crime because I wore a coat like that on a very cold day. I marched past there many times there, you know. Up Downing Street and Downing Street. And as I walked past there then, I thought, of course, what would really happen if I shouted out what I'd had shouted out when I'd been on the marches. Maggie, 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 out, out, out. Now that would have caused a sensation, wouldn't it? A real sensation. This was a fake sensation. And so I restrained myself. I didn't say any such thing, but it was tempting.
Michael Foot's life has been one long protest march. No Ban the Bomb rally was complete without him. But he's also a man of many paradoxes. He's both a rebel and a loyalist, a tub-thumping orator and a literary scholar. And though he's a grizzled veteran of Labour's many civil wars, his own brand of socialism has always been difficult to define.
You've never been a pacifist, have you? Well, you're not a pacifist.
I'm not a pacifist, no.
And you've never had any sympathy with communism as a doctrine, or totalitarianism. You've never flirted with that, have you?
I've never been a communist.
You're not really a Marxist, are you?
I'm a bit more of a Marxist, I would have thought.
And you're not a Christian socialist?
No.
Well, then, where is the mainspring of your socialism? What kind of socialist are you?
Well, I don't know what kind of label you put on it. I'm a libertarian socialist.
A libertarian socialist?
I believe that socialism is the way to get the greatest freedom for individuals.
There's a touch of Jesus about him. I know he's an atheist, but there is a touch of Jesus about him. I don't know why I'm saying this. First time I've ever said it, but I think there's a touch of this, yes.
Michael's ambivalent. He's partly a politician and partly a man of letters. And the two are slightly at war with each other all the time.
His supremely intellectual form of argument is to shout balls at you. Very, very loud. You know, now if you shout balls loud enough, in the end you just stop arguing. Say, okay, on the decibel count you win, you know. I can't shout balls as loud as you.
Hey, you dirty son. Hey, leave him on.
Foot is a lifelong Plymouth Argyle supporter. The team that has never won a major football trophy aptly symbolises his attachment to the underdog and the lost cause.
God, that was terrible.
Yeah.
That was just awful, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Inexcusable.
The Foot family have been coming to watch the Pilgrims play for the past 80 years. for Michael Foot and his brothers were born and bred in Plymouth. He was the fifth of 7 Foot children. They inherited from their parents a radical temperament and a fiery ability with words. Foot's father was a Liberal MP, a campaigner against alcohol, and a bibliophile. Isaac Foot owned the largest private library in Britain, containing 100,000 volumes. For although he was a teetotaler, he was a compulsive book addict.
In a sense, it was out of control, but even so, if you're going to be a drunkard, that's the best kind of drunkard to be.
And are you like that as far as books are concerned?
No,
do you have to smuggle them in so that Jill doesn't realise?
No, I'm much more controlled than that. You asked her. She doesn't think I am, but I am. Compared with my father, I am an abstemious. I'm abstemious itself.
Michael obviously inherited the obsession. I mean, it is an obsession. I mean, he has the same trouble getting books into his house now with Jill that his father had with his mother. You know, you cannot bring any more books into his house. And they were very serious about it. I mean, Jill's very serious about it. Jill rings me up. I have secret meetings over there, you know, where she gives me books. I mean, she says, you come round at this time and I'll give you the Thackeray's. So I've got the Thackeray's next door.
Michael Foot's library, even minus the Thackeray's, is impressive. His great literary heroes are the romantic poets, the political satirists, and the essayists of the 18th and 19th centuries.
I can't imagine what life would have been like if I hadn't been introduced to William Hazlitt and Jonathan Swift and Benjamin Disraeli and Byron here. But these books, you know, these people, they're living companions. You can learn more about some of these people than you can about people that you're living with now.
Isaac Foot had a fierce hatred for the Tory party, which he passed on to his sons, along with his passionate moral fervour.
Everybody used to think with my grandfather that he was the most charming, lovely man to meet. But he used to say, you know, bite a foot and you bite granite. And that's true with Michael, terrifically. You know, he can be lovely to you, but if you turn against him, or if you are disloyal to the party, or things that he feels are very, very important, he can be very, very angry.
Foot had grown up in the shadow of his elder brothers, who were all to be publicly distinguished. Dingle was first a Liberal MP and later the government's Solicitor General. John ran the family's law firm and was to be made a Liberal peer. And Hugh was to become Lord Caradon, British ambassador to the United Nations. It was the least their father had taught them to expect.
In their youth, in their childhood, there must have been this competitiveness instilled in them. I don't know, I suppose it's part of the old Liberal Methodist tradition that you set the children against one another. You tell them that they go to, and it was told to me as well, that you have to go to Oxford to get a first and be President of the Union. And they all were Presidents of the Union, I mean, all 4 of them.
After Oxford, Michael Foot broke with the family's Liberal politics when he first worked as a shipping clerk in Liverpool. The poverty he saw there in the depression of the 30s convinced him that only left-wing socialism could provide the answers. But as he found a new political faith, he suffered a personal rejection. He was refused accommodation by a landlady because he had both asthma and eczema. Did it make you self-conscious as a young boy and a young man having eczema?
Well, I think it does, just because I used to think that it made you, you used to think that it was going to interfere with your sex life, you know, and you thought that no woman would ever look at you if you had your eczema like that, and naturally enough, it was repulsive for people, and so I thought that. No.
Did it?
Did it? Oh, I think so, yes. I'm sure it did, and I was very great repression, had great repressions.
Foot wanted to go into journalism and politics, but he lost for Labour in a safe Tory seat in the 35 general election and struggled to make a living as a freelance. In London, he met the young Barbara Castle, who was also a would-be journalist and politician, and he fell for her fiery left-wing charms.
It was never a romantic relationship. He wasn't a particularly romantic figure. He got, and not that that mattered to me, but I mean, he's still got this terrible asthma, and the eczema that goes with it, and he always looks scruffy. But I don't know, there was something that attracted us to each other.
We both have the same ideas of what we thought socialism should be. We were just about the same age. We'd had the same ideas of how we thought it should be a real, strong, belligerent Labour Party that we wanted to see built up.
Foote and Castle would go on marches together, demonstrating against the rise of fascism in Europe. And in 1937 they were both given jobs on a new left-wing weekly called Tribune by its founder, Aneurin Bevan. The Welsh firebrand became Foote's mentor and lifelong hero, with his passionate belief that in left-wing socialism he had the answer to the nation's problems.
We have found it, and for God's sake, let's hold our heads up and apply it with all the courage we possess.
I, more than anybody, had, he shaped the whole of my political outlook, and right from then, that is to say, from the time of the foundation of Tribune in 1937, right up throughout the war and throughout the whole of the period subsequently, he was the person whose political outlook was most in accord with my own. He was teaching me all the time, that is, and Aneurin Bevan was my teacher.
I suppose I must have been always aware that inside that rather untidy chrysalis there was a beautiful creature waiting to emerge, and that, of course, he did. When Aneurin Bevan, whom he adored and who greatly believed in Michael, introduced him to Beaverbrook.
Lord Beaverbrook, the millionaire Tory press proprietor, became a much more unlikely hero for Foote. Beaverbrook liked to collect together striking women, intellectual men and senior Tories for weekends at his Surrey country house. And to add spice, he would invite young left-wingers like Michael Foote.
And of course he loved the glitter of that circle with all clevers, and H.G. Wells, all sorts of people there and beautiful women floating around. He loved it. I don't blame him.
You always got good champagne, I must say, at Beaverbrook's house. We did justice that was to anything that was set before us, and of course it was a kind of life of luxury that something that I never ever dreamt existed.
Impressed by Foote's radical journalism, Beaverbrook gave him a column on the Evening Standard, a key newspaper in his powerful Daily Express empire. Although Beaverbrook supported the appeasement of Hitler, and many people saw him as a thoroughly evil figure, Foote was prepared to overlook his hero's faults. He felt Beaverbrook was a great journalist with an anti-establishment irreverence. Foote has felt the need for hero figures throughout his life, and as in Beaverbrook's case, his love could be blind.
Well, I did love him. I loved him almost like a father. I had 2 or 3 of these other father figures. I remember Aneurin Bevan saying to me on one occasional day, saying, "Don't make a hero of me, but I said I can't help it."
When war broke out, Foote's asthma excluded him from military service. He helped write a best-selling polemic called Guilty Men, savagely attacking pro-appeasement Tory ministers. Beaverbrook made Foote editor of the Evening Standard. A newfound self-confidence brought him some short-lived wartime romances. And he championed the freedom of the press, even at a time of war.
Mr. Michael Foote.
He spoke at a rally to protest against the government's threatened suppression of the Daily Mirror for publishing a critical cartoon.
The ministers come along and tell us, have told us in the last 2 or 3 weeks, of course it's only the Daily Mirror they were trying to get at. The attack is over, they say. No more demands on any other newspapers. All other newspapers may continue to live in tranquility and in freedom and in peace. There's something rather familiar about those words. I have no more territorial demands.
He's not so bad, is he? He's got a promising future in front of him. Anyway, he had a better idea than the bloody ministers then of what should be done. And, I'm not saying he was always right, but sometimes he was.
With the war ending, Foote was chosen to fight an apparently hopeless seat for Labour in his hometown of Plymouth. As he prepared for the 1945 general election campaign, he was contacted by a young woman. She was Jill Craigie, a left-wing socialist, and one of the very few female film directors. She wanted to film Foote in Plymouth during the election.
You arranged to meet at the Ivy, which was a very posh restaurant. And I remember thinking, as I knew you to be a very strong left-winger from the reports in the press, I remember thinking, well, if he wants me to go to the Ivy, that's kind of socialist for me. So I was prejudiced in your favour right from the start.
I haven't been able to keep up the standard ever since. She was tremendous, I still think so. And she was the most beautiful woman in the land. But lots of people were swooning in front of her. All the camera crews that she went round with, they fell for, as I did, fell for her too.
I mean, was it love at first sight?
Well, no.
Well, you had a lot of pretty girls before me, and there's plenty of photographs of pretty girls. And when I first went to his flat, there was a whole range of cosmetics. When I stayed the night, you said, here you are. So he wasn't an innocent, exactly.
What do you think Jill saw in you?
God knows.
It was very largely physical. I liked his mind, and I liked his myopic look in his eyes and his smile. And he was rugged and unconventional, which I liked. He was just my type.
We have a right to aid from the nation. We say the burden must be shared. Yeah. It is unfair.
Michael Foote was the hero of Jill Craigie's idealistic film, which called for the building of a brave new city of Plymouth after the war.
There are many towns and cities in Britain which have never heard Hitler's bombers overhead, which have never suffered the wounds and horrors which we have seen in the streets of Devonport and Plymouth. By this plan, we can make ours one of the most beautiful cities in the whole wide world. Yeah. And if we are given the aid which we deserve...
Your speech at the election was that you said, well, Plymouth could be the most beautiful city in the world. And I thought, thank God, there's a Labour chap who's actually interested in aesthetics.
Yeah.
But then I discovered later when I met you that you're not that mad on aesthetics. You like a good view, but in fact
I was just ignoramus, you mean?
Just consider the difference between then and now, because you had Lord Astor, who was a Tory, conservative, high Tories, saying we must have nationalisation of the land.
Yes, bit too red for present-day Labour leaders, you mean?
Yes,
Foote won Plymouth in the Labour landslide of '45, and he married the director of the Plymouth film. But there was to be no pitter-patter of tiny feet to distract him from politics. Foote became a leading member of the Keep Left group of Labour MPs. And in the civil war which broke out in the party after Labour lost power in 1951, Foote was the loyal tribune and propagandist for his hero Nye Bevan. Bevan and his wife Jenny Lee, who were both MPs, led the forces of the left in a battle for the soul of the Labour Party against the right-wing leader Hugh Gaitskell. Gaitskell wanted to create a new Labour Party and drop old socialist policies like nationalisation or public ownership.
I think the Labour Party can be rebuilt on the basis of showing to people the real meaning of public ownership, and if a leader himself doesn't agree with that proposition, well, then I don't think he's the proper leader for the party.
Burn the bomb!
The H-bomb was another bitterly divisive issue between the left and the right. While Gaitskell favoured keeping the British deterrent, Foote was a convinced unilateral disarmer.
I remember when I first met him, we were all very CND, and I was very left-wing those days. And the march, I joined it just outside London, and I walked through. I didn't know he was at the head of the field, so I kept marching till I joined him. And I said, hello, Michael. He said, my God, it's you. I didn't know who he thought I was, but I was apparently you. And we were attracted towards each other. We were meant to be friends. We just chatted. When two personalities collide for the first time and have no antecedents to their meeting. So you just say, a nice day, and what are we going to say on Trafalgar Square? Have you got your speech? No, Spike, I haven't. No, I've got it in my head.
So I believe the first big significance of this tremendous march and of this tremendous movement is that it is a mighty upsurge of democratic protest against the military dictatorship.
But much to Foot's sadness, missing from the thousands in the square was his left-wing hero, Nye Bevan. In an attempt to unite the Labour Party, Gateskill had made Bevan Shadow Foreign Secretary. And at the Labour Party conference of 1957, Bevan had decided to reverse his previous position and attack the unilateralist resolution that Foot supported.
That if you carry this resolution and they don't run away from it, you'll send a British Foreign Secretary, whoever he was, naked into the conference chamber. What you are saying, that the British Labour movement decides unilaterally that this country contracts out of all its commitments and obligations entered into with other countries and members of the Commonwealth without consultation at all, and you call that statesmanship? I call it an emotional spasm.
Of course, I heard the whole speech up in the gallery. I was listening, and it was a terrifying moment, one of the most terrifying moments in my political life. But I didn't question his sincerity, you know. He was still, when he was in a debate, he would be out to win, and he was out to win that debate as he'd been in other ones. Unfortunately, he was defeating us in that debate.
Although Bevan's speech won plaudits from Gateskill, it led to a bitter rift with Foot. He attacked Bevan in Tribune, where he was back as editor, having lost his seat at Plymouth. The two men were only reconciled shortly before Bevan's death in 1960. Bevan's South Wales constituency of Ebbw Vale selected Foot to fight the by-election. The chain-smoking Foot stood as an uncompromising left-winger, pro-CND and anti-Hugh Gateskill.
Now, how about the discipline in the Parliamentary Labour Party on the H-bomb? Would you defy the party whips to vote against the H-bomb?
Well, we'll have to wait and see what we get when we get there. I don't think that they would have any right, the whips, to deny me the right to vote according to the pledges that I've given in this election.
The new MP for Ebbw Vale was soon to lose the whip for his left-wing rebelliousness. He embarked on writing an official biography of Bevan. But 3 years after the by-election came a terrible car crash. Foot had been driving up from Ebbw Vale with his wife.
We went into a lorry and was smashed up. Michael nearly lost his life. I didn't know about that. They wouldn't show me the newspapers, but I'm told subsequently that they were all writing his obituary, and his friends were writing his obituary with tears in their eyes.
But I recovered from it, and it was, as it turned out, very good things happened to me on account of the car crash. One, I gave up smoking because I couldn't smoke anymore, and that was a very good thing to do. I should have done that long before. It took me some time to get used to it. Next, I started reading Montaigne in hospital.
The aftermath of the crash demonstrated both his physical resilience and his remarkable ability to see the bright side of adversity. He was to spend 3 months in convalescence together with his wife Jill. But when the Ebbw Vale MP then went back to work at the Daily Herald newspaper, where he wrote a column, he was promptly sacked.
It was a bit of a blow then, but again it turns out very fortunate for me, but because of that I got the job of book critic on the Evening Standard, which I had for 10 years. Best job I've ever had in my life in a kind of way, because you could pick the book you wanted to read and write about, and so in a kind of way everything that happened at that accident turned out well for me.
Foot's fellow Bevanite, Harold Wilson, became Labour Prime Minister in 1964. Foot had written a brief but adulatory biography of Wilson, but he spurned the chance of a ministerial job. In contrast to his old friend Barbara Castle, Foot preferred to remain on the outside as a consistent critic of the government and the not-so-still voice of Wilson's left-wing conscience.
Governments must choose. That's what Barbara keeps telling us quite rightly. They must choose between an old, orthodox, deflationary policy and an up-to-date, full-employment socialist policy. That's what the government's got to choose about. And so far, it's made the wrong choice.
That was the first real period of breach between Michael and me, because I went into government because I believe, you see, I'm not interested in standing on the sidelines and jeering at the fellow or woman who's trying to do a job. I believe you should be in there.
What we've got to do is to use this conference, readopt the socialist policies which can reinvigorate our movement and enable us to win that next election instead of submitting to the defeatism that is all around us at the present time. I say we can break out of it, but we will only break out of it if we have faith in our own principles, not in the principles of our enemies.
Michael Foot, surely the most effective rostrum speaker in any of the parties.
Pretty good speech, I think, don't you? And like they thought, I think it was pretty good. And quite right, too. And I'm in favour of people in the Labour Party making sure that we do stick on the lines. So I haven't anything to apologise for that one.
After Labour's shock election defeat of 1970, the left-wing rebel and strong supporter of public transport decided it was time to come in from the cold. He won a seat in the shadow cabinet and sought to reconcile the party's divisions. When Labour returned to power in 1974, Foot was made Employment Secretary. He had the task of seeking to control wages and incomes, a policy he'd bitterly attacked only 4 years earlier, when it was run by the previous Labour Employment Secretary, his old comrade in arms.
First time I went to see him with some... about the nurses' pay. And I went and he gave me a little lecture about inflation and how they've got to be wage restraint. You know, it was almost like hearing an echo of what one had said oneself in years gone by, but he had adopted it. And he didn't seem to find anything odd about the fact that he should be completely reversing his role.
The difference is our wages and incomes policy was a much better one than hers. And it worked. You see, and it worked very well, especially, I may say, for the nurses.
The Scottish coal miners had helped bring down the Tory government. But now Foot's policy as Employment Secretary was based on Labour's social contract and his close relations with the unions. The deal was that the unions would cooperate with the government in exchange for measures they wanted, like the Health and Safety at Work Act and equal pay for women.
I know you call yourself a feminist.
Indeed. And I hope...
and I think you are a great feminist in theory. But in fact, in practice, I don't think you are.
All these charges now saying that I'm not a feminist is absolutely monstrous. I'm strongly in favour of women's rights. When I had the chance, we went ahead with equal pay and all these other things, maternity grants and people getting all these things, all done under your influence.
It wasn't under my...
Yes, of course it was.
Because that's another thing about you. You're a terrible flatterer.
Yes.
You know, you flatter people. You say things just purely for flattery. You don't believe a word that you're saying, you know.
What about you?
No, you're just saying it. Flattering. You don't really believe I had any influence over that at all.
No. Some people deserve to be flattered, including with you at the head of the list. What's wrong with that?
There's quite a lot wrong with it.
Well, you want all women to be treated equal. Do you think that's a good way to treat them? And you would complain if I went and treated other women in the same way I treat you, wouldn't you? Well, Barbara Castle, for example.
Barbara's in a different category.
Yeah, well, there you are. You see, you're back on the defensive now.
Yeah.
I brought an apple. She let me hold her hand. When I brought bananas, we kissed beneath the band. When I brought an orange, she let me hold her tight. I'm going to bring a watermelon to my girl tonight.
I think Michael did fall for women, and that's another Foot thing. They fall for women quite easily.
What do you mean?
Well, I think they do. I think they're very attracted by women, and they lose their hearts quite easily.
I remember saying to Michael when I very first met him, if you ever have any extra needs, I don't want to know, And even more important, I don't want anyone else to know. And that's the price you'll have to pay. And I think that's quite a decent attitude, isn't it? A fair one. And that's how it is. It's pretty secretive.
That same proposition, by the way, about not letting anybody know, if you have any other diversions, don't let me know. That was the same principle on which Nye and Jenny worked, I think. And that was a perfectly sensible thing to do. So I've really got nothing much to add to what she said. And she's laughing about it. And there you are.
Foote was enjoying his time as a minister. But his record in office was a somewhat hit-and-miss affair. And the early honeymoon period with the trades unions was fast coming to an end. Foote's own constituents in Ebbw Vale marched in angry protest when the government decided to close down the uneconomic steelworks, the area's main employer.
I'll tell you the truth as I've always told you the truth, and I believe the people you because what we've got to do is get rid of you. What we've got to do is to save the future of Ebbw Vale and the Valley Towns. That's what I'm seeking to do.
Jim Callahan became Labour Prime Minister after Harold Wilson's sudden resignation. He took over a minority government in deep economic crisis. And he made Michael Foot leader of the House with the task of cobbling together parliamentary deals to try and keep the government in office.
What are we going to do now?
We'll carry on.
What do you think were the biggest mistakes that you made in your time as a cabinet minister?
The biggest mistakes is a very difficult question. The biggest mistake was the way we failed to present and discuss properly the 5% pay policy that was put forward in the so before what became known as the Winter of Discontent.
In the autumn of '78, the trades unions angrily rejected the government's proposed 5% pay limit, with inflation running at double that figure. Foot's friends in the public service unions went on strike and presented a propaganda gift to the Tories.
The rubbish piled high in the streets, ambulances left unmanned, the dead unburied.
Terrible things happened in the Winter of Discontent.
Did you feel betrayed during the
betrayed.
Winter of Discontent?
No, not at all. I felt that we had to continue an intelligent conversation with them, even though the conversation might be in difficult circumstances, and even though we could understand what were the difficulties of the different individual leaders. And eventually, as I keep on repeating, eventually we did get a fresh agreement.
But by then, it was too late.
Well, as it proved to be too late.
The Tories' decisive election victory in 1979 once again plunged Labour into a bitter internal battle for the soul of the party. The commander of the left was Tony Benn, who concentrated his fire on the Labour right.
They have nothing to offer. And if you want to know what the real unwritten news story of the last few years is, it is that the right wing of the Labour Party are bankrupt.
The Labour right, led by Dr. David Owen and Shirley Williams, were themselves threatening to break away and set up a new Social Democratic Party. By 1980, Jim Callahan decided to throw in the towel. In the subsequent leadership election, the favourite was the right-wing Denis Healey.
I think it'll go well.
Do you think it'll be close?
I've no idea.
Foot was reluctant to stand, but was persuaded by left-wing union leaders and constituency parties.
Lots of people said to me, you can hold the party together better than the others can. There's a lot of people said to me, if Denis Healey elected, and they looked very likely to certain that he would be, you know, there's going to be such a bust-up in the party that we won't be able to hold the thing together.
The first bust-up had come when Foote slipped and broke his ankle within days of winning the leadership.
I just want to do 1 foot forward.
Right. How long are you going to be in plaster, Mr. Foote?
About a few weeks, but as I say, no engagement is cancelled, including the removal of the government.
David Owen, along with 26 other Labour MPs, ignored Foote's entreaties to stay and fight their corner within the party. The Gang of Three's decision to found the SDP was a particular blow to Foote, as Owen was MP for Foote's old Plymouth seat.
I like Michael, but I have never agreed with him on any serious, major, substantive issue of British politics. To find him leader of the Labour Party, we're holding all these sort of, in my view, outrageous views. I mean, a really committed CND. I mean, not just a minor thing. He marched from all of us from day one. Wholly implacably opposed to the European community. Great believer in nationalisation, no understanding of the economic market.
If you're going to be attacked by anybody, he's the person, isn't he? He's the worst mountebank I've ever seen in British politics. Who believes anything that Denis, what's he called, David Owen, believes? He was given a peerage by Mr. Major for services to the Conservative Party. He sits in the Lord as one of Mr. Major's nominees, and I must say he's earned that one.
The defection of the Gang of Three was matched by a concerted left-wing campaign against Foote's leadership. It was led by his old friend Tony Benn, a highly skilled political organiser who allied himself with the activists of the far left. The Trotskyist militant tendency had infiltrated the Labour Party. But when Denis Healey and Michael Foote eventually sought to have Militant expelled from the party, they were opposed on Labour's ruling National Executive Committee by Benn and his allies.
Tony Benn and some of the others were using the machine in a way that I thought was absolutely scandalous. We had every month a meeting of the National Executive, which instead of being a meeting of the executive of the party, was turned into an absolute gift to the Daily Mail, the Daily Express, and all the most bitter enemies of the party. They had all the journalists outside waiting for the latest meeting of the National Executive to feed the kind of stuff that suited them.
Well, they'll try, but it won't work.
So I would say to people,
to expulsion.
Well, I think the people who moved it will hope it leads to expulsions, but it won't succeed. And so I'd say to people at home, particularly good Labour people, don't worry. They got rid of Cripps and Bevan and Foote, and they all came back. And if they get rid of anybody this time, they'll all be back. So don't worry.
Big smile, please, sir.
Right. Mr. Foote, round behind you, please.
Foote was no match for the wily Tony Benn on the media.
That's what you said.
Look how we're too serious for us. Much too serious.
As you know, well, there you are.
I think Michael became a sort of living parenthesis. He would hardly be able to speak on those awful, sort of political programs without constantly thinking, well, I mustn't upset the unions, I mustn't upset this person, I don't want to be unpleasant to this person, I do. And so his sentences got longer and longer, and the parentheses in the sentences got longer and longer because of all the pressures he felt. And because he's such an overwhelmingly generous man, intellectually generous, he found it very difficult to take a hard and tough line and say, well, this is clear, what I'm saying on this is absolutely clear, I'm going to say it in 2 sentences, and I don't care who's upset by it.
I'm a leader of the party, and I hope we won't have any expulsions from the Labour Party, because I hate expulsions. Some people used to try and expel me in the old days. They tried to expel more eminent people than myself. Aaron Bevan, they tried to expel him once, but after he died, they had a commemoration, for him, and said he was the greatest statesman of the age, as I think pretty well he was. So you have to be very careful about expulsions.
When you became leader, it was television that was seen as one of your problems.
Yes, well, it certainly was a problem, and I don't think I solved it, and I should have listened to lots of people who were telling me how to solve it better, and I should have done that, no doubt, but, I didn't really think I had the time for it or that I could change. I was much too late to change by then, so that was a general disability that I had as a leader.
One thing he said to me, I said, what's good about being the opposition leader? What's the best part of it, he said? The car, Spike. I said, do you use it in opportunity? He said, oh yes, been up to the Lake District. Yes.
Right, here we are. Now, where's the driver? So, get it.
In the summer of '82, Foote first met Tony Blair, the Labour candidate in the by-election at Beaconsfield in Buckinghamshire. It was a safe Tory seat, made safer by the Falklands factor.
Tony Blair joined the Labour Party, by the way, when I was leader. Some people forget that. Maybe he'd forgotten it too, but there you are.
Labour chose its candidate to match the tastes of the electors of Beaconsfield. Tony Blair's press secretary says that he's exactly the kind of young man that any Beaconsfield mother would be delighted to welcome as her daughter's escort to the young Conservative dance.
Together, we lost our deposits in that one, so we knew what defeats were like. Nobody who joined the Labour Party when I was leader can be accused of being a careerist.
Mr. Foote, could I ask you, how have you found your day here at the Beaconsfield by-election?
Well, I think it's been a pretty good day. First of all, we've got a wonderful candidate. Everybody agrees that Tony Blair's one of the very best possible candidates there could be, and we're very proud of everything he's been saying here, and whatever the result, we believe that he's going to have a very big future in British politics.
What a prophet he is, isn't he? Word perfect. And you can't say that. I just said that to curry favour with Mr. Blair. I said that right at the beginning when I first met him. I think it's amazing.
Foote ran the '83 general election campaign on distinctly non-Blairite lines. Even his own deputy, Denis Healey, felt that Foote had the wrong image, and his party's left-wing manifesto was seen as the longest suicide note in history.
He wasn't good as a party leader on television. He was a very good romantic rebel on television. But in an election, people are choosing a prime minister.
Thatcher, 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 not a man around to match her.
Who do we want? Who do we need? Who is the leader who really can lead Maggie Thatcher? It's Maggie for me. We want a government at Westminster that really sets its energies and its imagination to the task of stopping the nuclear arms race and having a...
Although Foote delighted the activists with his left-wing policies of tax and spend, increased power for the trades unions and withdrawal from Europe, he failed to attract the middle ground. And Rupert Murdoch's Sun newspaper, along with almost all the press, were less kind to Foote than they would be to Blair 14 years later. And even Foote's friends, like the political satirists, called him Wurzel Gummidge.
Well, you know, a bit harsh, I would have thought. It doesn't catch my finer points. Well, obviously didn't help with the voters, did it?
Mrs. Thatcher had won by nearly 150 seats, and Labour had its lowest vote in 50 years. Foote returned to his home in Hampstead and resigned as leader.
It was a terrible defeat. Nobody could dispute that, and I was in the centre of it, and must take some responsibility, or considerable responsibility, for it.
Would you have liked to be Prime Minister?
I don't think I ever really considered it, because I don't think it was heaven on the cards. I did enjoy being a minister. I think it was a good job, and I think it was a very exciting job, and it certainly made me think about politics in a different way. When I'd actually had the experience, I wouldn't have missed that for anything. But that's a different matter from saying that you should have been, or would have enjoyed being Prime Minister. But I think I would have done it quite well.
Do you?
Yes.
Avanti populo e la riscossa, Bagnero rossa, Bagnero rossa.
Foote's chosen successor, Neil Kinnock, began the long task of rebuilding the Labour Party and started to shed the left-wing policies that Foote had long espoused. Foote, who stayed a backbencher until 1992, has continued his literary career. He's now written 16 books in all. Earlier this year, he was a guest of honour at a party for Tribune, the paper that had first employed him 60 years ago.
But it's a pretty good occasion.
occasion for it, isn't it?
It's quite a remarkable occasion, actually.
Yes,
We must have a tenth of our readers here.
Yes.
The Tribune Party brought together old and new Labour.
Michael, they say Michael is a great propagandist, and that has been absolutely true, his life's work. The first time I heard Michael speak, he started something like this. He said, in 1945, the good people of Plymouth, Devonport, elected me as their Member of Parliament. In 1955, the bastards threw me out.
We have this Michael Foot icon here. It's a knitted doll of Michael Foot. Comes complete with donkey jacket, C&E badge, Alder Master's walking stick, and a decidedly old Labour red tie.
There's been a strand of intelligent democratic socialism that's kept going all through, and it's that what's going to see us through, and that
Socialism's almost a dirty word today.
Well, it's not with me and you, and
no,
it's
I
not.
know, but we're old Labour.
Well,
we're
no.
old Labour.
Michael Foot went to his first election meeting at the age of 6 in 1919, 5 years before the first Labour government was elected. In this year's general election, Foot and his wife loyally supported New Labour, even though they've seen the socialist policies they've spent a lifetime fighting for discarded by Tony Blair in the effort to make the party electable.
Angela Evans-Smith, Labour, 29...
Hey, that's it. Good old Basil.
Foot and his friend Melvyn Bragg were giving a joint election night party in Hampstead.
And if I can say this to Lizzie, who came second and who is the Conservative candidate, I once fought a very hopeless Conservative seat in Beaconsfield in the south of England, and look what happened to me. So you never can tell.
Good leader then.
But if we have done well, then I know what this is a vote for. It is a vote for the future. It is not a vote for outdated dogma or ideology of any kind. It is a vote...
I think he was referring to your time as leader.
I don't think he was referring to me personally, because we got on very well together, but I think he's got his view about what these things that had to be changed and had been changed, and good luck to him.
But those closest to Foot, like his revolutionary socialist nephew Paul, can't believe that Blair is Foot's latest hero.
Oh, I think he really thinks it's bloody awful what's happening, you know. I'm sure he really thinks that. I don't think it's a personal thing against Blair or anything, but quite the opposite. He's always spoken up for Blair when I've attacked him there, you know, saying what he says, you know, how he speaks. Decent chap, you know, decent chap, decent chap.
I think he'll eventually kill Tony Blair. I think he'll take his stick and break it over his head. No, he must be very, very depressed about the state of socialism, you know.
But Spike has the wrong idea of how I see this. I'm as excited as any other democratic socialist is to see such an event as this taking place before our eyes, a recovery, a political recovery such as has hardly been in the history of our country. The Labour Party is rejoicing up and down the country, left, right and centre, including maybe even my nephew Paul. He's not a member of the Labour Party, but we'll get him round eventually, I suppose, before I die.
Wherever he wants to go, whoever may be the foe, how little of them we know. We'll follow the old man, whatever he talks about.
Next week at 8:10 on BBC Two, beginning the story of the family that shaped the destiny of modern India, the dynasty.
I like to buy the